Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah daf Samach. Shavua Tov to everyone. This week's learning is sponsored by Carolyn Hofstadter, Adam Dicker, and family to commemorate the first year at site of Judith Hofstadter, Gittel Bat Krendel V'Binyamin Ben Zion, which will take place this Thursday, 27th of Av. Ma was a Holocaust survivor who came to Canada, met Dad in Montreal, and built a family and business together, as well as generously supported their community in Medina Yisrael. We all think of you and we miss you. As all the kids complete their Aliyah this summer, Mirza Hashem, we will all continue to be guided by your wise and humorous counsel. Okay, with that, we will get started. Today we're going to I'll just give a bit of an introduction, really an introduction to all these dapim we've been learning, and we'll continue to be learning about Yei Nesach, which is that the typical method of the Gemara of teaching halacha, or teaching what to do, let's call it, is by giving examples and cases. A lot of times they do that. Sometimes they give principles, sometimes they give cases. And particularly in this section, there's a lot of cases that talk about Yei Nesach and whether it is, whether it isn't, what happened, situation, because it was a situation that happened often. And through those situations, we're supposed to come out with the rules. Now, the problem is that the details of the situations are not always 100% clear, and the principles behind the psak are not always 100% clear. And when it says forbidden, it's not even clear always. Does it mean forbidden just to drink or forbidden also to benefit from? So there's a lot of lack of clarity about these sugyas, and it makes it a little bit confusing to learn, because if you're trying to come out and say, oh, I want a clear idea of what just went on here, it's going to be confusing, because the commentaries, the Rishonim particularly, what they try to do is to take out the principles and take out the halacha. And so what's the bottom line, and what do we learn from this, and what are the rules? But there's a large variety of opinions here about all the cases. So I'm going to try to give some of the complexity of it, without trying to confuse you too much, because I think it's really important to understand how complex these issues are in terms of what the case is, what the principle is, what the ruling is, what we would take the general ruling out of, and it creates a lot of confusion. So I just want to raise that, because it's important to understand how halacha develops, right? Each one reads it in a bit of a different way. Understand, because it's a case. What was unique about this case? Was it because he didn't touch it directly? Was it because he touched it with something else? Or does that not matter? Was it because the Gentile was focusing on the action, right? Because of that, it leads to a lot of different opinions. Okay, with that, we'll get started. So we started with this case of a barrel of wine, chavita dechamra, 3 lines from the bottom of Nun Tedim Abed, de'ishakala barza, that the spout broke. Okay, now the spout, we're talking about a spout in the middle somewhere of the barrel. Okay, on the side. So there was a spout, and the spout broke, right? The where basically you have a spout and then it closes, and that closure opened, and jumps in this Gentile, right? We've seen this before, this idolater, and jumps in and says, I'm going to save the day, right? I'm going to help. Okay, we're going to see another case of this. There's at least 3, right? Where they come in to help, but sometimes some kind of help is the kind of help we all can do without. Right? It wasn't very helpful because now he touched the wine. So the question is, what's the status of the wine? Now, all he did was he touched the wine that was coming out of the spout. So Amar Papa, called to the Have Bar Zachamra Asir. Right, whatever's by the beres itself, right, where the spout is going to be forbidden. The idach shari, the rest is permitted. And Rashi explained, what do we mean the rest, right? Or what's the reason the rest is permitted? Because we don't view all this wine as connected. Okay, it's not like all one unit. There's the wine that's coming out. That's not really considered. We don't consider it as if he touched the rest of it. However, there's a second version of Rav Papa. Rav Papa anabar zachamra asir v'idach shari. All the wine up until the beres, meaning from the top of the barrel up until where the opening was, that's all basically going to flow out through that opening. So since the idolater is holding the hole there, then all the wine theoretically could spill out through that hole, and all that is considered connected. Now, the wine at the bottom is not going to move as a result of that hole. That's stationary. So that's obviously going to be permitted. That's what Rav Ashi said. Right? The idach shari, the rest underneath the hole, is permitted. So 2 different approaches about what Rav Papa said. Rav Yemar kitana. And Rav Yemar says, so you can already see, by the way, if you want to come up with how we're going to paskin, well, already it's confusing here because we have 2 versions of what Rav Papa said. Is it just the wine that's coming out of the spout, or is it all the wine above there? It's going to get even more confusing because Rav Yemar says kitanai. What Rav Papa said, and this is in the first version of Rav Papa, is a machloka between Tanaim. And this is going to be a Mishnah in Tful Yom. Tful Yom is a person, here we're going to be talking about something else about wine entirely, not Yenesech, but if an impure person, a person who is carrying impurity, they went to the mikveh that morning, but they haven't yet waited till the sunset, and they're still considered impure. And they touch, there's a barrel with a hole in it, it's going to be the same thing, and they touch where the hole is. So what becomes impure? So it's the same issue. And we're going to see there's a machloket here, and what Rav Papa said is only one opinion. Chavit shenikva. So we have a barrel that had a hole in it. Bein mipia, whether at the top. Bein mishula, whether at the bottom. Bein mitzida, or on the side. V'nagabo tful yom tmeah. If a tful yom touches this hole where the water is, where the wine is, or whatever's inside, doesn't matter whether it was at the top, whether at the bottom, whether at the sides. We view all the wine. This is the opposite of what Rashi said before, because this is an opposite approach of the way Rav Ashi explained Rav Papa. Rav Papa, we said, there's no chibur, and it's not all connected. It's not all considered one. He says, what do you mean? The wine is all one. It's all in one barrel. Touch part of it, it's like you touch the whole thing. So that's Tanakama. So the whole thing in the Tful Yom case, again, it's not Yenesech, it becomes impure. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, mipia mishulat me'ah mitzida Torah mikan mikan. Says above, if it's above the top of the barrel, the hole is, and the Tful Yom touches it, the whole thing is forbidden. Why? Because the bottom is a basis, is like the base, all the wine at the bottom. So if he touches the wine at the top, the wine at the bottom is holding up that wine basically, right? If it weren't for the wine at the bottom, you wouldn't have wine at the top. So it's all functioning as one unit. If the hole is at the bottom and he touches the wine at the bottom, well, we have the same problem as we said before in the second Lashon of Rav Papa, that when you let out when the water would start going out, and if he's holding it in, he's basically holding in all the wine above, because as soon as he would let go, all the wine would start flowing down. So the top and the bottom, he says, would all be impure. But mitzideha, from the sides, Torah mikan mikan. Above and below, it's going to be fine. Because on the sides, we're only viewing the connection to what's right at the hole. Because we don't, the wine is kind of going, gravity is pulling it downward, and the hole is on the side. So any wine going out of the side is not going to be, if he's touching that, he's not mitame anything else. So you see that the first version of Rav Papa is this opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And why is this important? Well, it's really important because it means that Rav Papa is holding by a minority opinion. Which means that, forget about what I said before, do we hold like Rav Papa version 1 or Rav Papa version 2 to Paskan Halacha? Some of the commentaries say, what do you mean? Based on Rav Yemar, Rav Papa is going against the mainstream opinion. So we don't hold like Rav Papa at all, because he disagrees with Chachamim, who would have said the entire barrel is going to be forbidden. So that's also an interesting, Again, if you want to get to Halacha L'Maaseh, you could see all the confusion about two different languages of Rav Papa, and then the fact that he holds like a unique opinion, maybe that means we don't hold like him at all. So anyway, things to think about. We'll delve into more. Amar Rav Papa. Okay, we have a lot of statements of Rav Papa. We're even going to see one later of Rav Bar Papa. Obviously, this was a topic that was very hot in his time, and very relevant. Amar Rav Papa. Ovei kochavim adana v'Yisrael akuba. If you have an ovei kochavim who's pouring from the barrel into the Jew's jug, and the Jew is holding the jug, and the idol worshiper is holding the barrel, chamra asir. Okay, assuming, maybe the barrel was the Jews, but the Gentile is pouring it, the idolater, and the Israel is holding the jug, chamra asir. Why? My time. Well, what's the reason? Ki ka'ate mikoch ovei kochavim ka'ate. Because how is the wine moving? In the end, it's true that the idolater is not touching the wine, but the idolater is pouring the wine, and it's moving on account of the idolater, and therefore it's forbidden. Rashi says, what do we mean forbidden? Is it only drinking? Is it also hana'ah? Again, like I said, it's confusing. So Rashi says, b'hana'ah, also you can't benefit from, because it's like wine that must go ovei kochavim. It's just like wine that we said before, lech amrina and l'nazira, stay far away from this, It's kind of the same, There he poured the water into the wine, but here also, he's pouring the wine, even though he's not touching the wine, still coming in contact. Others say, no, it's only forbidden to drink from, it's not actually forbidden to benefit from. So again, lack of clarity. But the idea here is it's koach of the ovei kochavim. His actions are causing the wine to move. But Yisrael Adana, Vovei Kochavim Akuba, but if it's the opposite, if the Jew is pouring from the barrel and the idolater is holding the jug, Chamr Shari, then the wine is permitted because the Vovei Kochavim is just standing still, not doing anything, right? The wine is being poured. It's true, he's important to stand there to hold it, but that's not really moving it. V'im etzadet sidude aser, but if he moves it while it's pouring, like to allow it to go inside, he's doing some movement there, then it's going to be forbidden. And Rashi says, so Rashi gives two explanations here. Either we're talking about that the jug was totally full, and therefore as he moves it, it could be he'll touch it. Or even if it wasn't full, and there's no concern he's going to touch it, because the wine's going straight into the jug and he won't touch it, but he's moving it. And with moving it, that's like shich, right, where he puts his hand inside. The way they would be menasech the wine, to offer it up as a libation, was to move it. So since he's moving it, even though he's not actually physically touching it, we're going to be concerned. Okay. Amar Rav Papa, another statement of Rav Papa. If we have an idolater who's holding a wineskin that's sealed and tied, okay, that's this zika, and he's carrying it. Now when you carry it, it moves, but it's sealed completely. Because of Israel Chorei, there's a Jew walking with him. Mal Yashare de lo Makarkesh. Okay, so if it's full, then it's fine, because if it's completely full, even if he moves it, the wine doesn't actually move around because it's full, right? When something's totally full, there's no way for it to move around. So that's okay. But Chasira Asir de lo Makarkesh. But if it's missing some wine, then it's going to be forbidden because it could be he can move it, right? Because when something's not full, you can shake it, right, and it'll move. So even though the Jew's there, right, it's tough to know whether he was actually menasech. What's the Jew there for? Rashi says, Chaze de lo nagav ve'kochavim b'gaveh, right? He just made sure, the Jew is there to make sure he didn't open it and touch the wine inside. Okay, but he still, by shaking it, he could theoretically be menasech even without touching it. But Rav Ashi Amal, Chasira Asir Dilma Makarkesh, Kuba Malia, I knew I skipped the line. Kuba Malia, but if we go to a jug, now a jug is not sealed, it's not tied at the top, like this wineskin is. So Kuba Malia Asir, if it's a jug and it's open and it's full to the top, obviously it's going to be forbidden. Why? Because maybe he touched it. Even if the Jew's there, right, he might not notice, but a little bit might get touched by him. Dilmanaga. Chasera share delonaga. But if it's not full, then you don't have to worry that he touched it because it's not going to come squirting out. Although Rav Ashi disagrees, Rav Ashi Amal. And I want you to think about, if you carry a cup of water, right? You're always being very careful that it doesn't spill, right? Because it does move around. And he says here, Zika ben malya ben chasera share. Either which way, it's going to be permitted. Now, think about why. My taima ein derech nisuch bekach. This is not the way we generally do nisuch. Okay, and Rashi says here, why is it going to be mutal? Because even if, now when you are carrying this jug and you don't want it to spill, we're assuming if you're carrying a jug of wine, you don't want it to spill, whether it's full or whether it's not full. Because even if it's not full, it kind of jumps around and it could fall out. So you're going to be walking very, very carefully. So even though it might move around while you're walking, you're not moving it in order to offer it up as a libation. You're actually trying to prevent the moving from happening. And Rashi uses this terminology. He says, before with the matzadeh ratzdude, when he's tilting it while you're pouring the wine in, there Rashi said it's kocho b'chavana. It's you're moving it, the Gentiles, the idolaters moving it, and they're moving it on purpose. Okay, in other words, they want it to move, right? Because they want to get the wine in. And that could be a concern for a libation, when you're moving it when you want it to move. In this case, you might be moving the wine, but you don't really want it to move. You don't want it to shake inside, because the more it shakes, the more it'll spill. Right? So again, imagine yourself trying to carry a cup of water. You're always being very careful that the whole thing won't spill out. So the moving is shelo b'chavana. You don't want that. And because you don't want it, we actually don't say it's yeh nesach then. Okay. Next case. Ma'atzarta zayara. Now we have a wine press. The wine press we talked about before was that people treaded on the grapes. But there's another wine press where they put boards on the grapes, and the boards would press on the grapes and get the wine out. Some people say we're talking about the original stage of the treading. Instead of that, they did it with boards. Some people say it's after they finished that, then they would put boards on top to get out the extra, whatever didn't come out from the treading. Either which way, it doesn't matter. We now have this place called a ma'atzarta Zarah, which is a ma'atzarta. It's a press where there's boards on top. Often they would then have a screw screwed into the board, and you would either turn the screw, or the screw at the top, it was like a gigantic screw, had a hole. In it went a stick, and you would, like a pole, you would turn it around. That would turn the screw, which would then press the board down. So you can see how there's direct action, like you could step on the boards, and that would help press the boards down. You could use twist the screw, or you could twist the pole. That would cause the screw to twist, which would cause the boards to go downward. Okay, so there's kocho, there's kocho, which is indirect, and then there's even more indirect, okay, which is the pole. So, Matzarta Zayara, the question is, if a Gentile is operating this, Rav Papa Share, Rav Ashi v'temer Rav Shimi bar Ashi asu. Okay, Rav Papi forbids, Rav Ashi, or maybe Rav Shimi bar Ashi forbids. Okay, sorry, Rav Papi permits, Rav Ashi forbids. Bikocho, so now the question is, what exactly are they arguing about? Which case of the Matzarta? Because I just said there's a bunch of different ways you could do it. Well, bikocho kule amalu pligid asr. If you're stepping on the boards, the idolater, for sure, it's a problem. Because that's kocho, like we said before. Pouring, that's their direct action is causing it to happen. Ki pligi b'koch kocho. Their machloket is if you're moving the screw, let's say. And then there's a machloket, is it forbidden or permitted? Now, those who say it's forbidden, there's a machloket rishonim, whether we mean second degree, right, moving the screw. What if you're moving the pole that moves the screw, right? What if it's third degree or fourth degree? So there's a machloket about whether, if you're going to be strict about koch kocho, you're going to be strict about it any indirect or just directly indirect, right? Second degree and not third or fourth degree. That's an interesting machloket. You can see that in Rabbeinu Tam. Anyway, Ikeda Amrei, but there's a different way of reading this. You can see why this gets completely confusing, because there were different ways of, here we have a machloket. It doesn't even say exactly which case they're talking about, and then we have two ways of understanding. Either the machloket's about kocho, or ikeda amre b'koch kocho kule amalu pligi tishari. Everybody agrees indirect damages are permitted. Ki pligi b'kocho. The question is if they're stepping on the boards. Hava uvda, but in any case, there was a case with koch kocho. Va'asar Rabbi Yaakov min harpakot. He was strict like the first reading, which is even in koch kocho, he was going to be strict, and that's why there's this big debate among the Rishonim about whether it's only second degree we're going to be strict about, or third degree or fourth degree as well. Ha'u chavita. Moving on to the next case. There was a barrel, de ifka ala orka. It broke lengthwise, which means from top to bottom. Okay? Now, idre, again, jumps in, hu oved kochavim, an idolater, chabka, and hugs it, right? Basically puts the two pieces together. Shar Rafram bar Papa, v'itemer of Huna Bered Rav Yoshua, lezabune lovdei kochavim. Rafram bar Papa, I told you we get to him, the son of Rav Papa, or maybe it was Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua, who permitted selling this to Gentiles. Okay, he didn't permit drinking, but he did say you could sell it to Gentiles, okay, because what's the issue here? Why can't you drink it? Because by his actions, right, of moving the sides of the vessel, that basically, the sides of the vessel touched the wine, right? It was as if this kind of indirect touching of the wine, or direct indirect, right? His actions, his direct actions, caused the wine to be, right, to move and to be touched. But, hanimile de pakala orka, that's if it splits from top to bottom. Avalaputye, but if it splits in the middle, okay, and you have like the top part of the barrel and the bottom part of the barrel, and there's a crack in between those two, afilu b'shtia sharia. And what is the Gentile doing basically in that case? Basically what happens is they separate and the wine starts squirting out the sides. So the Gentile comes and presses down the top part on the bottom part, right, and holds it in place. Then you can even drink it. Why? It's like putting bricks one on the other. He's basically just keeping the vessel the way it's supposed to be, like just holding it in place. That's much less intervention, and therefore it's going to even be permitted to drink. Now we're getting off a little on a totally different case, and this is more similar to things we're going to see later on about this issue of hadacha and niguv, which we'll talk about in a second. But here we have a case, and maybe this is here because they were talking about the ma'atzarta, and there's a case in the ma'atzarta. There was novei kochavim, an idolater, de ishkach tavikai b'ma'atzarta. Turns out he was in the wine press. Like I'm making wine in this wine press, or I'm about to, and he had wine in here before that was his. Amar Rav Ashi. Now the issue is that the sides of the wine press still have a little moisture in it. So what do I do to get rid of that moisture? So it depends how much moisture there is. He cleaned out all his wine, but there was still a little drops of wine. Amar Rav Ashi, Ika tofech lat piach. Okay, this is a concept that comes up in Tumah also, because of liquids in Tumah, but without getting into Tumah now and impurity. But what it means is, if there's enough moisture in the sides of the gat of the wine press, that if I touch it and I touch something else after that, I will get something else wet. As opposed to if I touch it, I get a little wet, but if I touch something else, I won't get it wet. It's not enough liquid. So that's the difference. If there's enough that I could get something else wet, by hadacha by niguv, then you need to rinse out the whole wine press and you need to dry it. But if you don't have that much water and just a little bit of moisture, then it's enough to just rinse it with water, and that's fine. Okay, new mission. I have a bowl with wine in it. Okay, I want to write the pit at the bottom of the wine press, let's say. There's my pit with wine. And a Gentile idolater is standing right nearby. Do I have to worry? Well, if I owe money to this idolater, then asur, then it's forbidden. If I don't, then mutar. In other words, the assumption is if I have a loan out with this Gentile idolater, then the idolater will feel like the wine is theirs because they can collect from it. So therefore, they might actually do a libation with it. If we have no connection through a loan and then they have no rights to my wine, then there's no reason why they would do such a thing. It's mine. Nafal lebor va'ala. Okay, and this we quoted this section before. If a person falls in the bore and gets out of it, so an idolater falls into the bore and comes out, or madado b'kaneh, these are all ways, we saw this before, where the idolater is touching the wine, either touching it physically or touching it through something else, like this next one, midado b'kaneh, they measured it with a reed. Hitizet tatzir abakaneh, they knocked out a hornet with a reed from the wine. Or there was bubbling up at the top, foaming, and they took off the foam with a reed, or with something, I don't know. They took out the foam. All these, there were cases that happened like this, and they permitted it to be sold. Because in all these cases, now again, it's a bit of a debate here how to understand, but number one, the idolater has an intent to be doing something else, right? Like they fall into the bore, they're not actually trying to do nisuch, right? They're trying to figure out how they're getting out, okay? Or they are measuring the wine. Whatever they're doing something with intent. They're focused on that, so they're not going to be doing nisuch. So that's why we're going to permit it for benefit, although we're still not going to permit it to be drunk, because in the end they touched it either directly or with something. There's a big debate about this medadoba kanet. What if they measured it with their hand? Is it specifically because of reed, or were they just giving an example with a reed because that was the case that happened? But theoretically, if you touch with your hand, it would be fine too. And on that, there's a machloket rishonim, because again, does it need two things: that it's indirect and that you're not really intending, or is it enough just to say you're not really intending because again you're focusing on something else? But it has nothing to do with the reed. It could be even if it's with the person's hand. Rabbi Shimon Matir. Now we saw this a few dapim ago on Nun Zayin, that Rabbi Shimon has this crazy approach that, or I don't know, crazy, it actually could be pretty normal approach, but in light of everything we've seen, Rabbi Shimon says this is fine. So the commentaries explain what's so fine about it according to Rabbi Shimon. He even allows it for drinking. Why is that? So Rabbi Shimon says the real Yain Nesach problem is really with the wine of the Gentile, okay, the idolater. This is all cases where it's the Jew's wine, and the idolater somehow comes in contact with it. So if the idolater comes in contact with it in a way where it's possible, they did nisuch, and you have to worry about that, then of course Rabbi Shimon's going to forbid. But in all these cases, we have reason to believe they were focused on something else and they weren't doing nisuch. So if there's no concern of nisuch, and it belongs to the Jew, then Rabbi Shimon says it's fine, okay? As long as they didn't touch it randomly and move their hand around in it, with possible intent to do nisuch, we don't have to worry about it. We're going to see later what the rabbis thought of Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Natal et hachavit uzraka b'chamato labor. Last case in the Mishnah, Gentile takes a barrel, throws it in anger into a bore of a Jew. Right, it was the Jew's wine, and he threw the Jew's wine into the bore, to the Jew's bore. It's a case like this, and they permitted. We'll get back to why this is at the end of the daf. Amar Shmuel. Now we're back to the case where the Gentile idolater is standing next to the pit, and is there a concern that the idolater is offering up the Jew's wine as a libation only if the Jew has a loan out with him? But Amar Shmuel, it has to be that the wine is lean to the loan, not just, okay, I owe the idolater money, but it has to be, I owe the idolater money, and the wine is part of the lien to this loan. Amar Rav Ashi, and you can infer this actually from the next Mishnah. Ditznan, it says on the next page, if I have wine of an idolater, meaning really like I took grapes and shredded them in the wine press of the idolater, but I made sure to do the whole thing b'tara. Made sure it was cleaned out. I made sure no idolater touched it, and I did it all in their property. And I left it, finished, ready wine, in their domain. Now, what really happened here? Why was it doing it like this? Well, I'm buying it from them. Basically, I paid them the money to be able to use their grapes and do all this. So right? We don't know if I paid the money yet, but if halak kotevlo hitkabati mimcha ma'ot mutal. If the idolater writes on a piece of paper, I got money for this, even if they didn't get money for this, but basically paid, okay? Then there's no concern the idolater is going to come in contact with this wine because they know it's not their own, even though it's in their property. But if the Jew wants to take it out, if the Jew were to want to take it out, and the idolater would say, right, the opposite of I already paid, right? They would say, no, until you pay me, I'm not letting this out of my possession. And they forbade this in Beit Shan, and they said in that case, and the Jew left the wine there, it's no good. Because the idolater believes that that's really their own. If they're not going to give it to me until I pay for it, then they view it at that point as if it's their own. So that's only if they won't let me. But if they would let me take it without paying, then it would be mutal, right? Then I would be able to drink the wine. Well, what do you infer from here? Exactly this. It means that, in other words, again, you need, in order for it to be a problem, it has to be a milva on that wine. It needs to be the wine is lean. Because unless they think they have a right to the wine, there's no way they're going to touch it. It's the same idea. Nafal labor va'ala. Now, the way I read the Mishnah originally, it sounds like the idolater falls into the bore, the pit, is about to drown, somehow saves himself, comes up, and they'll be saved, right? And then they're out of the bore, and the wine's fine because they're busy falling in. They're not really thinking while they're falling into the bore about offering a libation. They're thinking, how am I saving my life? And when they get out, they're not either, right? They're trying to get out of there. But Rav Papa didn't understand it that way. Amar Rav Papa lo shanu ela she'ala met. It's only if when they took him out, they took out the idolater while they were dead. Aval Allah chai asur. But if the idolater was on their way up, still alive, it's forbidden. Why is it forbidden? Well, my time, Amar Rav Papa, de dame aleki yomei dam. It's just like we saw on their holidays. If I pull out this idolater from the pit, right? Imagine this woman falls in, is about to die, and I pull her out. What's the first thing she's going to do as she's getting out and feeling like, wow, my life is saved? She's going to say thank you to her gods. And what's the best way to do it? Well, she's in a pit full of wine. Oh, just to offer it up as libation to her gods. So Rav Papa doesn't allow it in that case. So Amar Rav Bar Ava. Now we're going to go back to Rabbi Shimon, who permits. And here we're going to see the approach of the rabbis to Rabbi Shimon's lenient opinion. Rabbi Shimon brachot al roshto. We should bestow blessings on Rabbi Shimon for saying this. Now, why was he so excited about Rabbi Shimon saying? Not so much that he permitted, but when he permits it even for drinking. And when he forbids it even for benefit. In other words, right, this whole confusing thing that we've been talking about. When they say forbidden, it's hard to know. Do they mean forbidden to only to drink? Is also forbidden to sell? Right? Saying Rabbi Shimon has it very clear, black and white. It's either permitted or it's forbidden, and it's to the extreme. Permitted, everything. Forbidden, everything. And that makes a lot more sense, he says. Amar Rabbi Chia Berei D'Abar Bar Nachmani, Amar Rav Chisda Amar Rav, Amar LaAmar Rav Chisda Amar Ze'eri. Okay, Rav Chisda was quoted, or someone quoted Rav Chisda as quoting Rav, or someone quoted Rav Chisda as quoting Ze'eri. Halacha ke Rabbi Shimon. We paskin like Rabbi Shimon. Which is very interesting because we don't actually hold off for 1 minute. Some people say Amar Rav Chisda Amar Li Abar Bar Chanan Hachi Amar Ze'eri. Okay, some people say Rav Chisda was quoting someone who told him that Ze'eri said this. Halacha ke Rabbi Shimon, but ve'ein halacha ke Rabbi Shimon. But then they say, but the halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so that's like an interesting. I just want to see one thing here. Maybe in the second version. No. Okay, so basically the Gemara is telling us. Okay, we don't know who added this, but the words in the Gemara are. But we don't hold like Rabbi Shimon, and that's why we're very strict about Yei Nesach, and worried always, even if we're not really so worried that someone offered as a libation, we still are strict because we don't hold like Rabbi Shimon. And we always have to be concerned, or in many cases that, and especially to forbid at least for drinking purposes, right? Maybe not for benefit, but yes, for drinking, if there was some contact of an idolater, and nowadays we say Gentile in general, with the wine. Natal chavit uzraka lebol. Ze haya ma'aseh b'chshira. So here, Gentile takes the barrel of wine, throws it in anger into the boar. And again, we're assuming here the key is the anger, right? Because the focus was on throwing it in anger. And when you're angry, there was no option there that all of a sudden they're like, oh, maybe we'll offer as a libation. Amar Rav Ashi, kol shebezav tameh, be'ovei kochavim oseh yei nesach. Kol shebezav tahol, be'ovei kochavim eino oseh yei nesach. Rav Ashi says, any case where a zav touches something and it would become impure, in that same way, if the Gentile touches something, right, a zav is a type of impurity. It's a man who has gonorrhea, and right, this discharge, halachic definitions of what kind of discharge makes the person a zav, but they can be matame things by touching them. They can't be matame things if they throw them. Now Rashi points out, by the way, there's lots of ways a zav is matame that an idolater is not. And this doesn't mean, even though he says always, he doesn't really mean always, Rav Ashi. But what he really meant to say was, in the cases where in a zav it would be pure, which means by throwing. If a zav throws something at something and touches something, okay, that object does not become impure, okay, by throwing. So, like if he, touches something which touches that, or moves something, yes, but without touching it. But if he throws something, it's not. So, if by throwing, right, the zav is tahor, he's saying an idolater that throws, also it's going to be not a problem of Yei Nesach. To which Eitive Rav Huna Rav Ashi, Rav Huna says, what are you talking about? Natala tachavit, uzraka b'chamato lebor, zayama sebevei sham b'chshiro. What do you notice here? He threw the wine into the boar. Now, if you say that throwing does not create a problem of Yei Nesach, this actually says it does. Why? Because he said, right, we permitted this. Why? Because it was a b'chamato in, shelo b'chamato lo. It sounds like only because he was angry. If he wasn't angry and he had thrown it, it sounds like it would have been a problem. It was only not a problem because it was in anger. Because it was in anger, the movement couldn't have been a shichshuch, right, for nisuch. It couldn't have been a moving for nisuch because he was angry. But if he wasn't angry, it sounds like it would have been. So throwing sounds like it would be a problem in general. To which the Gemara answers, Hatam de ka'azu minei uminei. Now that's a place, that case is not what you thought. Our Mishnah, even though it said threw, it didn't really mean threw. What he did was he took the barrel and he rolled it over to the pit in anger, and it rolled into the pit. Okay, that was what he did out of anger, and that was more a direct action and not throwing. Throwing is already more indirect because he throws it and it gets there. Not right. His hands are not involved when it goes. So that would be a different situation. Okay, and then we could go back and say what Rav Ashi said is right. Okay, and that would work. Okay, so let's do a review. We'll do a very general review of the stuff because there were a lot of different cases, but basically we have all these cases. Is it Yei Nesach? Is it not Yei Nesach? Right? And what are the criteria that would determine? And we said it's a little bit confusing, and that's why it's a little hard to summarize the stuff, because we saw different issues, right? Different interpretations among the different commentaries. But we had, particularly a few issues I can mention, which are, kocho shelo b'chavana, ken b'chavana, kocho, indirect. We had intending for something else, right? When there's intention for some other action, we're going to be more lenient. How lenient? That's Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis disagree about that. And with that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shavua Tov.